chemical weapons, civil wars, and wars within wars. The ongoing crisis within Syria is an incredibly complex situation. With the high death rate and the amount of countries involved, the stakes are raised extremely high in what some are calling the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. Hello, I'm Brian Nguyen, and this is a public service announcement. It begins in December 2010 with an event dubbed the Arab Spring, in which a wave of uprisings, revolutions, and civil wars spread throughout all of North Africa. Emerging from the ruins of the Iraq War, several terrorist groups have grown and taken advantage of the Middle East's weakened state. The largest known organization is known as the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, otherwise called ISIS. Controlling much of northern Iraq, the Islamic State began to spread into Syria, causing civil unrest. Within Syria, many citizens have complained about high unemployment rates, widespread corruption, and a lack of political freedom under the current rule of President Bashar al-Assad. The civil conflict begins in March of 2011 when the government violently begins to crack down on all pro-democracy and anti-loyalist protests. This backfires and only causes the citizens to fight back and begin to rebel. The Syrian government continues a brutal campaign against its own citizens through executions, beheadings, and eventually the use of chemical gases, a form of weaponry considered an incredibly atrocious act and outlawed in most wars. This increasingly violent campaign brings in the interests and concerns of outside countries, namely Russia and the US. The outside countries begin to take sides, and tensions rise between those countries as they butt heads due to clashing ideals about how to go about the conflict in Syria. This creates what is called a proxy war. Although the Syrian government, United States, and Russia all claim to be working against terrorism and ISIS in the Middle East, their inner conflicts shatter their war on terrorism into several wars on each other. So, where do each country's loyalties lie? The US wants to stop the Syrian government's violent acts against its citizens and sides with the rebels, while Russia sees the rebels as terrorists and wants to try to stabilize the current Syrian government. And to make matters worse, the rebellion as a whole is shattered into almost 1,200 different factions by 2013. In order to gain more power, the factions have begun to exploit the rivalry between two major Muslim groups, the Sunnis from Saudi Arabia and the Shias from Iran. This creates a religious war to be added on top of the civil war, proxy war, and the war on terrorism. Political science professor Barbara F. Walter has pointed out that since the end of World War II, civil wars have lasted an average of 10 years. The war in Syria is 6 years in, and it is fully expected to be prolonged for several more years due to the sheer number of factions and countries involved. The implications of this conflict could lead to major changes in governments and borders within the Middle East, as well as increased tensions between key country relationships. As of right now, there are about 500 US Special Operations troops stationed in Syria with an estimated 31,500 ISIS fighters. 4.8 million Syrians have fled as refugees, and 6.5 million have been internally displaced. Since the start of the war about 6 years ago, over 400,000 people have been killed, and there is no end sight for this war. Of the Syrians currently still in the country, 85% live in poverty, 7 million can barely afford food, and 1.75 million children are out of school. The UN estimates it needs $3.4 billion to help out the 13.5 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. This is where you are needed. Yes, you. The Middle East is ravaged with corrupt governments, terrorist groups, and people in need of your help. The world is going to have to do every little bit it can to reach an end to this conflict. Support your military, pay attention to political decisions, participate in discussions, research your current refugee policies, go protest, whatever. Just get your voice heard, because it is your voices together that will push countries into ending the conflict. Please raise awareness and don't let these atrocities go by unnoticed. You can donate to any of these credible foundations. Thank you for listening. I'm Brian Nguyen, and this has been a public service announcement.